Federal MP Tim Wilson is apparently a passionate defender of free speech. The only problem is that he's also facing a serious challenge in the upcoming election, meaning he no longer cares about free speech. And in the middle of it all, there's been a battle over campaign signs that made it to the Victorian Supreme Court. That's what I want to explore in this video. Tim Wilson is the Assistant Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. He's also a big supporter of free speech, or so he says on his website. In an article titled "The State of Free Speech in Australia," he says limits to free speech needs to be justified based on substantive harm it can cause others. Otherwise, the freedom needs to be left alone.
The opposition thinks they're clever in attempts to offend, insult or denigrate me by using the nickname Freedom Boy when I speak in this chamber. To the opposition I say, feel free. It's a badge I wear with pride. Today I publicly restate my commitment to free speech because some of us never lost the faith.
But the problem for Tim Wilson is that his safe federal seat is no longer safe. In 2016, he was elected as the federal member for Goldstein, which is in Melbourne, and he's had an easy run since then. The seat of Goldstein is super safe for Liberals. In fact, for over 100 years since Federation, Labor has never won that seat. In 2016, Tim Wilson was elected by a massive margin, and in 2019, he was easily re-elected. But then, the lead up to the 2022 election came along, and a few months ago, Zoe Daniel announced that she would be running for the seat of Goldstein as an independent. Zoe Daniel was a long-time journalist with the ABC, often reporting from war zones overseas, as well as natural disasters all around the world. Her announcement came as part of a well-organised community movement, and you may have heard of them as Teal Independents. She's also been gaining serious traction, and some recent polling shows that she might just win the seat. Now, polls only mean so much, but the momentum started really worrying Tim Wilson. And the most visual representation of this momentum was all the signs that started popping up around Goldstein. Once it became more obvious that Zoe Daniel's popularity was growing, he started to try and suppress his own constituents' ability to express their political message through these signs. You see, Tim Wilson's argument was that local council planning regulations prevented people from putting election signs on their property before an election had been called by the Prime Minister. The state of Victoria has what's called a State Planning Policy Framework, which sets out the general regulations, including when you need a permit to display a sign. These state regulations are then replicated by all the local councils, including Bayside City Council, which covers most of the seat of Goldstein. Those regulations say that in some cases you don't need a permit to display a sign, including a sign publicising a political event, as long as it isn't displayed for longer than 14 days after the event is held or 3 months. Breaching these rules can result in fines of almost $1,000. Tim Wilson's interpretation was that because the election hadn't yet been called, the 3-month time period would need to be before the last possible election date. Now, for some time, we've known that the 2022 election was going to be held in May, even if the exact day wasn't clear. But because of some confusing technicalities, the House of Representatives and the Senate actually have different election cycles. As a matter of practice, both elections are held on the same day, but there is a technical possibility that the Prime Minister decides to hold the election for the Senate in May and the election for the House of Representatives in September. This has never happened before, which is a good thing because it's a complete waste of time, and it wasn't going to happen this election either. Why I bring all this up is that Tim Wilson was arguing that because of this possibility, Zoe Daniel's supporters could only put their signs up in June, which is 3 months before the September date, unless an election was officially called before that. Given how late the election ended up being called, what Tim Wilson had wanted was to give a completely new, independent candidate less than 6 weeks to gain enough recognition in the electorate to have a chance of winning against the sitting major party member. Bayside City Council flipped from one position to another. Their initial statement said that the signs were fine to be put up as they fell within the 3-month period up to the likely election date in May, and that no permit was required. But then, 2 days later, they reversed that position. Their new statement said that because of the election technicalities, signs will be unlawful if they were put up before either June or when the election was officially called. Soon after that, residents began receiving warning letters, giving them 2 days to remove their signs or face being fined. I'll come back to this in a little bit. While the council was changing his position and confusing candidates, Tim Wilson tried to make it look like he was just pointing out some of the issues online to try and get consistency, and denied making complaints to the council.
Local member Tim Wilson denies he made any complaint, though he has taken to social media in recent weeks, pointing out he has always obeyed the council's rules.
But this was far from the truth. In reality, he was running a full-scale campaign against his constituents' rights to express their political opinion on their own properties. Freedom of Information documents released to the Age newspaper showed numerous emails, calls and texts between Tim Wilson and the council to pressure them to change their guidance. For example, multiple texts and phone calls throughout February were made to the council to argue the election date technicality, as well as pressure the council to enforce the sign regulations against residents supporting Zoe Daniel. Around the same time, Tim Wilson's office was also providing information to the council, with photos of properties displaying signs, as well as a spreadsheet with a list of homes he wanted the council to target. In the background, he had been emailing his supporters and urging them to dob in neighbours with Zoe Daniel signs and provide him with their address, which I guess then went into the spreadsheet to the council. So much for freedom of expression. So the question then becomes, why? Why would Tim Wilson do this instead of focusing on his own re-election campaign? His reasoning was that he just wanted to do the right thing. He wanted consistent rules for all candidates. But what he actually meant is rules for only the candidates going up against him, because he didn't say anything about his fellow Liberal Party members. Neighbouring seats also fall under the same planning rules, and yet the Liberal members there had election signs up early. In the seat of Higgins, you had Katie Allen. And then in the seat of Kooyong, you had Josh Frydenberg signs everywhere. Speaking of Kooyong, the YouTube channel Swollen Pickles does great political videos. He's just released a brand new video on Josh Frydenberg, link is in the description. But Tim Wilson's argument that he just wanted everyone to do the right thing becomes even more laughable when you look back to the 2019 federal election. Here he is then, putting his signs up before that election was even called. The real reason why he fought so hard against these signs was that he knew it would be practically impossible for an independent to win the seat without community engagement and recognition, and signs are a big part of that. Zoe Daniel explained it well in this interview.
It's not a level playing field for independents who are trying to challenge candidates that are representatives of the major parties, and we tackled this election from a standing start. So it's very important that there is name and face recognition when it comes to my candidacy as an independent.
Given the threat she poses to Tim Wilson's seat, he thought an easy way to undermine her campaign would be to remove her ability to gain recognition. But it didn't end there. This is Keith Badger, the campaign director for Zoe Daniel. He's a resident of Goldstein and has a sign on his property. He was also one of the residents that received the warning letter from council, threatening to fine him if he didn't take the sign down within 2 days. But he was done playing games and instead took legal action against Bayside City Council in the Supreme Court of Victoria. In court, he had a bunch of arguments, but there were two main ones. He argued that the council had misinterpreted the regulations and time limits for signage, and that even if the council was right, the signs were protected by the implied freedom of political communication within the Australian Constitution. The court mainly focused on whether the council had interpreted its rules correctly. Bayside City Council was referring to the clause that said a sign must not be displayed longer than 14 days after the event is held, or 3 months. They said that for this clause to apply, you would need to know the time and place of the event. Without that set date, signs couldn't be displayed. But the court held that this interpretation was wrong. The clause didn't require an event to have a fixed date. The sign could be displayed for a total of 3 months. The limitation was on how long the sign could be up for, not how early it could be put up. Residents displaying Zoe Daniel signs were therefore entitled to display their signs for a period of 3 months at any time before the federal election, but not longer than that. That cleared up the immediate issue, but it did leave unanswered questions. For example, if a resident's 3 months were up, but the election was still a few weeks away, then they could be forced to take the sign down in the critical period before election day. This would go against their freedom of political communication. The court didn't make a decision on this because the issue at hand had been resolved. The council's interpretation was wrong and they weren't able to issue any fines to residents. The court didn't want to deal with hypothetical situations that may or may not come up in the future. The judge did, however, provide a preliminary opinion on the issue, which I found informative. He said that election signs appeared central to the implied freedom of political communication, and that it would make more sense for the regulations to deal with these kinds of signs separately and with less restrictions. Ultimately, Bayside City Council lost the case and had to pay the legal costs. After the court decision, Tim Wilson's response gave away a potential second reason why he had fought so hard against the signs. He probably hadn't ordered his own signs in time. There were a few giveaways here. In statements to the media after the court case, he said, "Now we have a consistent ruling, we can get on with erecting our signs in the coming weeks." In a post online, he then said his signs were on order. Tim Wilson continued to act as if this mess was Zoe Daniels' fault, but the reality was that his plan backfired massively. All he ended up doing was wasting the council's money and raising publicity for the independent campaign.
Because we all know what's going to happen at the election, which is, of course, the government is going to be returned.
Regardless of which party wins this election, Tim Wilson might not be coming back to Parliament. Thanks for watching. If you want to help me make more content, please consider checking out my Patreon page, links in the description.